I used to believe betrayal came with warning signs. A tone, a look, a shift in the air. But that night, as laughter echoed from my own dining room, I learned that betrayal can sound a lot like hate disguised as love. I never imagined that the night I set the table with trembling hands to serve my family would be the moment my world be quietly shattered by my son and his wife. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. Now back to our story. It had been months since my son, Michael, and his wife, Clara, had come over for dinner. They'd been busy, as they always said, running their boutique, traveling for business, attending events. Still, when Michael called earlier that week to say they'd come by, my heart had lifted. I told myself this was a chance to reconnect, to feel the way things used to be when Thomas was alive and Michael was still my boy, not this polished man always looking at his phone. I had cooked his favorite meal, slow-roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, the same recipe his father had loved. I wanted him to remember home. As I checked the roast one last time, I caught my reflection in the oven door. My hair had more gray now, my hands more wrinkles. But there was still something steady in my eyes, something that believed that love, no matter how strained, could still be restored with a good meal and patience. I wiped my hands on the apron and carried the breadbasket toward the dining room, smiling to myself at the sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter. Then I heard it. Clara's voice. Light, sharp, cutting through the air like a knife wrapped in silk. "God, she's such a fossil," she said, laughing. "Still dreaming about that trip she'll never take. We reallocated the money anyway. It's technically a joint account." For a moment I didn't understand. The words floated in the air, meaningless. Then Michael's laugh followed. Deep, familiar, careless. My son's laugh. My knees weakened. I gripped the wall for balance. My own flesh and blood. My boy laughing about what they'd done to me. My savings. The money I'd spent 12 years guarding after Thomas died. Every coupon clipped, every indulgence refused, every small joy postponed. All for that dream trip I'd promised myself. It wasn't just money they had taken. It was my hope, my freedom, my sense of worth. I felt my chest go cold, like someone had poured ice water straight into my veins. For a long second I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart beat so loud it drowned out their voices. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to throw the breadbasket against the wall and watch their faces shatter with guilt. But something inside me, some older, wiser part, told me not to. Instead, I straightened up, smoothed my dress, and walked into the dining room. They looked up when I entered, both smiling, both pretending. Clara's lipstick was perfect, her wine glass half full. "Oh, Evelyn, that bread smells divine," she said sweetly. I forced a smile. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. I placed the basket on the table and took my seat, the same seat I'd sat in for 30 years beside Thomas. I passed the plates, poured the wine, and nodded at their stories about business and suppliers and how exciting it was to be young entrepreneurs. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh, though my mind was miles away. The roast I'd prepared with so much care tasted like ashes. My hands shook under the table, but I kept smiling. Because I realized something that night. Something sharp and terrible. They thought I was harmless. To them, I was the sweet, aging mother who wouldn't understand banking apps or online transfers. The woman who baked too much bread and forgot where she put her keys. They saw me as background noise. A warm body that cooked and listened but never fought back. And that was their mistake. As Clara bragged about their new business strategy, I watched her through lowered lashes. Her perfect nails tapped against her wine glass, her tone full of smug satisfaction. I caught Michael's glance once. He smiled at me, oblivious, comfortable in the illusion that his mother would always be soft, forgiving, safe. But as I looked at him, I felt something inside me change. The warmth I'd spent all day trying to create turned into something else. Quiet resolve, cold and steady. I didn't speak of what I'd heard. I didn't confront them. Instead, I served dessert, poured coffee, and wished them good night. I hugged Michael at the door, inhaling the faint scent of the boy he used to be beneath the cologne of the man he'd become. I watched them drive away, their laughter trailing down the street. When I closed the door, the house fell silent. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty table, the untouched bread, the candle flickering low. My hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. I realized in that moment that they would never see me coming. That night I stopped being afraid. And the woman they thought was weak began to plan her quiet revenge. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. Every creak of the old wooden floors echoed louder than it should have, as though even the walls knew something inside me had changed. I sat in the living room surrounded by pieces of my old life, the travel guides Thomas and I had collected over the years, still lined neatly on the shelf like promises we never kept. Morocco, Toto, Barcelona. Their glossy covers stared back at me, the corners bent and worn from years of daydreaming. Each one told a story of the life I once planned, of a woman who believed that patience and love would one day be rewarded. I picked up the guide to Morocco, its pages faintly smelling of dust and time. Inside, a red circle marked the desert I'd always wanted to see. I could almost hear Thomas's voice teasing, "You'd melt in that heat, Evie." He'd said it with affection, the way only he could. My eyes lingered on his handwriting, tiny notes about places we'd never gone. My heart clenched. After he died, I told myself that one day I'd still go. One day when Michael was settled, when the house was paid off, when life stopped feeling like an obligation. But one day never came. Instead, my days turned into a quiet routine of doing things for everyone but myself. I became the dependable mother, the emergency contact, the one who filled in every gap without being asked. I paid bills without complaint, babysat without rest, and smiled through disappointments that no one else even noticed. Somewhere between those years of small sacrifices, I disappeared. Not suddenly, but slowly, like a photograph fading in the sun. The clock ticked past midnight, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Clara's voice, her laughter, the sharp way she said, "fossil." I'd thought that word belonged to things long dead and buried. Not to me. But maybe, to them that's what I was. Something old. Something useful only when needed. I stared at the fireplace, cold and dark now, and realized that I had been living in a museum of my own making, filled with relics of a woman I once was. By dawn I'd stopped crying. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that sits on your chest and dares you to move. I brewed coffee and drank it black, standing by the window as the first light of morning crept across the garden. The roses Thomas had planted were still there, stubbornly blooming even through neglect. I envied them, how they grew back every season, no matter how much they were pruned. After finishing my coffee, I got dressed carefully, the way one does when preparing for something final. I chose my gray coat, the one with deep pockets that felt like armor, and tied my hair back. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving. My reflection wasn't soft anymore. There was steel in my eyes. The bank sat on the corner of Maple and 4th, the same one I'd visited every month for years. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and perfume. I waited in line behind a man arguing about overdraft fees and a young woman scrolling through her phone. It was strange how normal everything looked, how the world kept moving even when your own had stopped. When it was finally my turn, I approached the counter. The young clerk smiled in that polite, practiced way. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilcox. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to review my account details," I said, trying to sound calm. "The joint one under my name." She typed for a few seconds, her nails clacking against the keyboard. Then her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilcox, but it seems your access has been restricted. Only Michael and Clara Wilcox are listed as the primary users." For a moment I just stared at her, the words floating in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe in. I'm the account holder," I managed. My voice cracked slightly. "Yes, but your online access and authorizations were updated last year. You'll need their consent to make any changes." Their consent. My son and his wife. The same people who had laughed about stealing from me over dinner. I felt something cold wash through me, numbing every nerve. My lips trembled, but I forced them into a thin line. "I see," I said quietly. "Thank you for your help." I turned away before she could see the tears rising behind my eyes. My steps were slow, measured. Outside, the sun was bright, almost mocking in its warmth. I sat on a bench by the bus stop, my hands trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. I wasn't just being stolen from. I had been erased. My name, my authority, my years of sacrifice, all overwritten by signatures I had trusted. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. I climbed aboard and sat by the window, the city rolling by in a blur of colors I barely registered. My heart was breaking, yes, but beneath that grief, something else was forming. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was resolve. A quiet, steady certainty that the woman they thought they could control no longer existed. By the time the bus turned onto my street, I knew I would never be handled again. I was done being the sweet, forgettable woman everyone underestimated. They had no idea what they had awakened. The day after my visit to the bank, I woke with a strange kind of stillness inside me. The kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion that's turned into focus. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a single cold truth. I had been betrayed by the two people I loved most. But I wasn't going to crumble. Not again. After pacing the house for hours, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the old address book Thomas had kept in the drawer by the phone. The pages were yellowed, smudged with time. My eyes landed on a familiar name. Daniel Harris. I hadn't spoken to him in years. We'd gone to school together, shared cheap sandwiches under the bleachers, and years later he'd sent a letter of condolence when Thomas died. I remembered him mentioning, almost offhandedly back then, that he worked in finance. I didn't hesitate. I dialed the number. When he answered, his voice was older, deeper, but still carried the same kindness I remembered. I told him I needed help with something sensitive, something I couldn't discuss over the phone. He didn't ask questions. "Meet me at Riley's Cafe on 7th, he said. "I'll be there in an hour." Riley's Cafe used to be a bakery when Thomas was alive. Now it was a tired little place, with flickering lights and the bitter smell of burnt espresso beans that clung to everything. I chose a corner table by the window, clutching my worn leather folder filled with bank statements, receipts, and withdrawal slips. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from anticipation, the sense that once I opened this folder, there would be no going back. When Daniel arrived, he looked almost the same, just more lined, a little grayer. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that carried both recognition and pity. "Evie," he said softly, "you haven't changed." "I wish that were true," I replied. We ordered coffee, though neither of us touched it. I slid the folder across the table. "I need you to look at these," I said. He frowned, unfolding the papers with care. As he read, I watched his face shift, curiosity turning into concern, concern hardening into anger. He went through every page twice, occasionally muttering under his breath. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "They've been draining your funds for months," he said quietly. "See these transfers. Repeated amounts, disguised under vague labels like vendor fees and supply purchases. But these aren't business expenses. These are direct withdrawals from your account into theirs." My heart sank, though part of me already knew it. He turned one page toward me and tapped a line with his pen. "This," he said firmly, "is elder financial abuse, Evie. It's theft. And if you took this to the authorities, you'd win." The words hit me like a spark to dry wood. Elder financial abuse. There was a name for it, for what they'd done. It wasn't me being naive or forgetful. It was a crime. But I didn't feel anger in that moment. I felt clarity. I didn't want pity or apologies. I wanted proof. "Can you help me get more?" "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "I can show you what to look for. Patterns, account links, hidden transfers." "But Evie," he said, leaning closer, "you'll have to be careful. Don't let them know you're watching." I smiled faintly. They already think I'm too old to notice. That's my advantage. He chuckled under his breath. Then use it. When I got home that evening, I walked straight to Thomas's old study. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the way it always had. In the bottom drawer, I found an old black notebook, the one Thomas had once used to track car repairs. I wiped it clean and opened to the first page. At the top I wrote, "The Record." That night I began my quiet work. Every conversation, every offhand remark, every careless laugh, I documented it all. When Clara bragged about her boutique success, I wrote down her exact words. When Michael mentioned our family fund, I noted the date and time. I started leaving my phone on the table during their visits, recording everything while pretending not to know how to use it properly. They underestimated me completely. Clara would sit at my dining table, sipping wine I bought, laughing about expensive furniture she'd found on sale. Michael would nod proudly beside her, never noticing the faint red light blinking on my phone. I'd smile, the same polite, tired smile I'd always worn, but inside I was sharp, focused. Wait. By the end of the week, my notebook had filled with names, amounts, and quotes. I stapled receipts together, printed screenshots of transactions, and even took photos of Clara's social media posts showing off new inventory that had been bought with my money. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was documenting, building a case. 4 years, I'd been the woman who waited, who hoped things would get better on their own. But as I wrote each detail in that black notebook, I realized something powerful. I had the truth on my side. And the truth, once written down, had weight. By the time the clock struck midnight, the notebook sat thick and heavy on the desk before me. My hand ached from writing, but I didn't stop. For the first time in a long time, my sadness wasn't drowning me. It was transforming into purpose, into strength, into something that finally felt like control. The morning I decided to go to the bank, the world was still gray and quiet. The streets glistened with dew, and the air had that clean, expectant chill that comes before sunrise. I didn't rush. I dressed deliberately. A plain navy coat, hair tied neatly back, the same black shoes I'd worn to Thomas's funeral. It wasn't grief I carried this time, but resolve. The woman who had once begged for kindness was gone. I was walking out of my house not as someone's mother or someone's widow, but as myself, Evelyn Hart. The bank's parking lot was almost empty when I arrived. A janitor pushed a mop across the marble floor inside, the smell of bleach thick in the air. I stood at the glass doors until the lights flickered on and the first teller unlocked them. She offered a polite, sleepy greeting, but I didn't smile back. My voice was calm, firm, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. "I need to speak with a senior account manager," I said. "Right now." A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a man in a crisp suit, his nameplate reading Peter Wallace. His expression was the sort reserved for delicate situations, the kind where people cry or cause scenes. I did neither. I placed my folder on his desk and opened it to the first page. "I'd like to freeze every joint account associated with my name," I said clearly. "Effective immediately." He blinked, uncertain. "Mrs. Wilcox, that's..." "Not Wilcox," I interrupted. "Hart. Evelyn Hart." I said it slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of it settle between us. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, like a door unlocking after years of being sealed shut. Peter studied the documents, flipping through with cautious precision. "You understand this will restrict access for your co-account holders?" "That's the point," I replied. He hesitated, perhaps expecting me to soften, to justify myself. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my identification, my legal papers, and signed every line he placed before me with a steady hand. When it was done, he slid a final form across the desk. "Would you like to open a new account?" "Yes," I said. "Under my maiden name." He nodded and entered the information. The rhythmic tapping of his keyboard was the only sound in the room. I felt no fear, no doubt, just a deep, startling quiet inside me. When he handed me the new documents, My fingers brushed the paper and I realized something simple but profound. I'd taken back what was mine. When I stepped outside, the sun had just begun to rise. Light spilled over the tops of buildings, washing everything in gold. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply without that familiar tightness in my chest. The air felt cleaner. But peace, I knew, doesn't come without a storm. That evening it came loud and ugly. The front door banged open, slamming against the wall. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Clara's voice hit first, sharp and furious. "What the hell did you do?" she shouted. "Our boutique card was declined in the middle of a supplier payment. You embarrassed us." I was standing in the living room, folding towels I'd just taken from the dryer. I didn't even flinch. "You mean you embarrassed yourselves," I said evenly, pressing a crease into a towel before stacking it neatly. Michael followed behind her, his face flushed, his voice trembling somewhere between anger and guilt. "Mom, you could have warned us. You could have given us time to fix things." I looked up then, meeting his eyes, the same eyes that had once looked up at me for comfort. "You mean time to hide more of my money?" I asked softly. The color drained from his face. For a moment, the room was silent except for the rhythmic sound of fabric folding. Clara recovered first, her voice dripping with indignation. "We were using that money to build something for the family. You're destroying everything." "No," I said, laying another towel on the pile. "You destroyed it the moment you stole from me and laughed about it in my home." Michael opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. "I heard every word that night," I said. "Every cruel thing you said. Every lie." Clara's jaw tightened. "You can't prove anything." I smiled then, small but certain. "Oh, but I can. The evidence is all yours, Clara." For the first time since they'd entered, she faltered. Her confidence slipped just enough for the fear to show. She turned to Michael, whispering harshly, but he didn't respond. He just stared at me, eyes hollow. "Get out," I said quietly, not raising my voice. "Both of you." They hesitated, stunned by my calm, but when I turned my back to them and continued folding, it broke whatever illusion of power they had left. Clara's heels struck the floor like gunshots as she stormed toward the door. "You'll regret this, Evelyn," she spat. "Maybe," I said without looking up, "but at least the regret will be mine." The door slammed behind them. Silence filled the house once more. I set the last towel down, perfectly folded, and exhaled. The air was still, but it wasn't heavy anymore. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like something I had to earn. Simply felt like something I'd taken back. That night, after the shouting had faded and their car had disappeared down the street, I sat alone in the quiet glow of the living room lamp. My hands were steady as I laid out every file, every screenshot, and every audio recording across the table. Each document told the same story, one of betrayal written in numbers, transfers, and the careless words of two people who thought I'd never fight back. The folder was thick, its weight heavy and satisfying. For weeks, I had lived in silence, pretending to be blind to their cruelty. But that silence had served its purpose. I had all the proof I needed. I typed the email carefully, attaching every file. Subject: Financial exploitation evidence. My lawyer's name sat at the top of the contact list. Rachel Vega. She'd handled some of Thomas's estate matters years ago. A calm, sharp woman who never missed a detail. I trusted her. I hesitated only once, finger hovering over the send button, then clicked. The files went through. For the first time in a long time, I exhaled without shaking. The next morning, I dressed neatly and took a cab to her office downtown. I arrived before the receptionist had even finished her coffee. The walls were lined with books and framed degrees. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and authority. Rachel ushered me in with a warm but cautious smile. "Evelyn," she said, "I read your email. I'm so sorry this happened to you." I shook my head. "Don't be sorry. Just help me make it right." We went through the files together, line by line, charge by charge. Her pen moved quickly, making notes, circling dates, marking patterns of theft so blatant it almost seemed absurd. "They didn't even try to hide it," she muttered. "They didn't think they had to," I said softly. "They think I'm too old, too naive." Rachel looked up, meeting my eyes. "Then let's prove them wrong." He nodded. "I also want to change my will." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "All right. Who are we removing?" "My son," I said. The words came out steady, though my throat tightened. "And his wife. I want them nowhere near my estate. Everything goes to my goddaughter, Julia." She nodded without judgment and began drafting the amendment. As she worked, I stared out the window, watching the city below. Strangers hurrying to jobs, people with purpose. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten I could still have one too. When the papers were ready, I signed them without hesitation. My hand didn't tremble once. Rachel leaned back, studying me for a moment. "Would you like to make a statement?" she asked. "A statement? Something on record, a video message. It can protect you if things escalate." The idea settled over me like armor. "Yes," I said. "Turn it on." She clicked on the small camera at the edge of her desk, the red light blinking to life. I sat up straight, smoothing the front of my coat, and looked directly into the lens. "My name is Evelyn Wilcox," I began. My voice surprised me, low, calm, without a trace of fear. "If you're seeing this, I'm either gone or done pretending. Michael, Clara, you earned this. You stole from me, but more than that, you broke something sacred. Love without respect isn't love. And being alone," I paused, the words forming like truth on my tongue, "isn't a punishment. It's peace." Rachel ended the recording and turned off the camera. "That was powerful," she said quietly. "It wasn't for them," I replied. "It was for me." A week later their trap came, dressed up as reconciliation. I received a call from Michael, his tone too polite, too rehearsed. "Mom, we just want to talk. The family's worried about you." Worried about the money, more like. Still, I agreed to come. I wanted them to see that the woman they once dismissed was gone for good. The meeting was at Clara's sister's house, a long dining table packed with relatives who barely spoke to me. I could feel the judgment before I even sat down. Michael started with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, we just want to understand what's going on. You've been making drastic decisions." I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, neatly labeled, every page in order. "You want to understand," I said, placing it in the center of the table. "Then start with this." They looked confused until I flipped it open to the first page. "These," I said evenly, "are every transaction you took from me. $47,325. Theft and emotional abuse wrapped in family smiles." The room went silent. Someone's fork clattered onto a plate. Clara's face drained of color. Michael looked down at the numbers as though seeing them for the first time. "I don't need your explanations," I said, standing. "I just wanted you to know I'm not your fool anymore." Clara's voice cracked with fury. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You'll die alone." I turned toward the door, pausing long enough to look back at her. "No," I said. "I'll live alone. There's a difference." Then I handed Michael a small white envelope. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the words I'd printed there myself. "Respect is worth more than what you stole." I didn't wait for a response. I left the house, the whispers following me to the porch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's mother, widow, or victim. I felt like Evelyn Hart, and she was finally free.